Hotel employees kicked the black man out onto the street without realizing he was their boss. If you're new to this channel, I invite you to click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any amazing new stories here. Andrew decided to go to a hotel he owned in San Diego. When he entered the main lobby, he felt familiar. As he walked near reception, two security guards spoke to him in a rude manner. A large man with a serious face stood in front of Andrew, preventing him from passing. "Can you tell me what you're doing here?" The security guard's voice was cold and seemed unfriendly. Andrew, not knowing why the person was being aggressive, replied calmly, "I'm here to check on the hotel. I'm one of the owners." But the word partner didn't seem to make any difference to the security guards. The second security guard, who was younger, stepped forward. He crossed his arms and looked at him with disdain. "It doesn't look like it," said the young man dismissively. "This is a very posh hotel, sir. People like you are not welcome here." Those words hit Andrew like a punch in the stomach. People like you. The implied racism was clear. He felt his blood boil in his veins, but he kept control. It wouldn't be the first time he'd faced this kind of situation, but it was still painful. "People like me?" Andrew asked, his voice firm, trying to stay calm. "I own this hotel. I can shut you down right now." The security guards looked at each other, showing that they didn't believe what he was saying. The leader of the group, Caleb, came closer. He was a tall man and looked scary. He had a serious expression on his face that showed power, but seemed to be filled with disdain when he looked at Andrew. "Friend, eh?" Caleb laughed. "You don't look like someone who owns a hotel like this. You're trying to steal, aren't you?" The direct curse was too much for Andrew. He took a slow breath and tried to control the anger rising inside him, but before he could reply, Caleb called for his men. Everything went downhill quickly. The security guards started pushing him. The insulting words turned into punches and slaps. Andrew tried to protect himself, but he was alone against many men. While the blows were happening, Andrew thought about the pointlessness of the situation. He, who owns part of that hotel, is being treated like a criminal. "Listen to me," Andrew said in a serious, determined voice, trying not to let his emotions take over. "I'm one of the owners of this hotel, and if you don't stop this now, I'll have you all fired on the spot." The notice of dismissal didn't have the result that was hoped for. In fact, it seems to have made the security guards more hostile. Caleb moved closer to Andrew, getting so close that he almost touched his chest. "Fired?" Caleb repeated, almost throwing the word out. "You're nothing but a liar. This is a very fancy hotel, and you can't stay here. I could take you away right now, and no one would notice." It was at that moment that everything fell apart. Caleb pushed Andrew hard without warning. This made a mess of everything. Andrew, a former boxer, had quick reflexes. His body prepared to defend itself without thinking. He knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. The moment Caleb moved forward, Andrew punched him hard in the face. Andrew hit with the certainty of someone who knew more about fighting than anyone else in the place. The impact was strong. Caleb's nose broke on the spot and blood began to trickle down his face. The head of security stepped back, surprised by Andrew's strength and skill. But the blow, instead of ending the conflict, increased the violence even more. The other security guards, who were watching the scene with an air of self-importance, quickly went after Andrew. In a matter of seconds, he was surrounded by many men. They were all prepared to solve difficult problems. Andrew was not an easy person to catch. He had trained for many years to fight competitors who were much more prepared than he was. He moved fast. He jumped to the side to avoid being hit. He would hit anyone who came close, but even with his skills, the number was too great. The security guards began to surround him, and the attacks became more violent. One of them hit him on the back, while another pulled him by the arms, trying to pin him down. Andrew tried to escape. His body moved without thinking to dodge the blows coming from various sides. Caleb, his face streaked with blood, stood up angrily. The shame of having been hit by Andrew was too much to bear. With a cry of rage, he got up again. This time, he wanted to end the fight, but Caleb wasn't just happy about that. With his face covered in blood, he spat near Andrew's body and spoke, in a cold, thoughtful voice. "This isn't good enough. We're going to take you somewhere where you'll learn your lesson." The security guards put Andrew in the trunk of a car violently, as if he were something that didn't matter. He hardly had time to do anything. He felt his arms and legs trapped. His body slammed against the hard metal inside the car. The lid slammed shut, making a loud metal noise. This sounded like the end of something important. Inside that small, stuffy place, Andrew tried not to faint. Her mind went from a sad thought to the feeling of almost fainting. She tried with great difficulty to understand what was happening. The car sped through the streets of San Diego and left behind the hotel that Andrew loved so much. The place he had helped to build, which showed many years of hard work and overcoming, was now the beginning of his greatest challenge. Inside, He fought the pain in his body, but he was also fighting the feeling of being powerless. Andrew was a strong and steadfast man, but at that moment, he was totally in the hands of his enemies. The time inside the trunk seemed very slow. He couldn't count how much time had passed or how far he was being taken. Every bump of the car made his bruised body hit the sides. This increased the wounds that were already open from the fight. His mind switched between confusion and clarity. It switched between feeling angry and feeling afraid. Unanswered questions repeated themselves in the darkness. Why does this happen? How did I end up here? The car stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the trunk lid being opened. The light that entered Andrew's eyes was very strong. He found it hard to bear. He closed and opened his eyes several times, trying to see better as the men pulled him out with force. His body hit the dirt floor hard, and he lay there without the courage to get up. Andrew was breathless and confused. He looked around. He was in a forest full of trees, a place far away from everything, totally separate. The tall trees blocked out part of the sky, and the silence there was oppressive, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. He realized that Caleb and the security guards didn't want them to find him. There, in that place forgotten to the world, there would be no cameras, no people who could see, only Caleb's evil intentions. "Get up, Walker!" shouted Caleb, his voice strong and full of anger. "Let's see how strong you are now." Andrew tried to move, but his body didn't work as it had before. The pain was too strong. His ribs ached every time he tried to take a deep breath. Still, he gathered what was left of his strength and tried to get up, but before he could get up, Caleb came at him with great force. The first kick was fast and hit Andrew's stomach very hard. He cried out loudly from the pain. His body doubled over. But Caleb wasn't happy. He kicked him again, this time in the ribs, and then another, in the face. The taste of blood entered Andrew's mouth as he tried, unsuccessfully, to protect himself from the attacks. The other security guards just looked on, as if they were silent people watching something frightening. Caleb seemed to have no brakes. Each kick and each blow had not only the strength of his body, but also all the anger that came from the humiliation he had endured in the lobby. Andrew, who had fought bravely up to that point, felt his body give in to the impact of the attacks. And then, in the darkest moment, Caleb stopped, panting, his hate-filled eyes fixed on Andrew. The silence between them was very uncomfortable. The darkness of the surrounding forest seemed to take over. Caleb came closer to Andrew. He crouched down next to Andrew, who was on the ground and too weak to fight. "This is for you to learn," said Caleb, his voice low but laced with venom. "You think you can mess with us? It's over." Andrew struggled to hear the words. His head was confused, between what was real and what couldn't be understood. He tried to stay conscious, but the world around him was starting to fade. The last thing he felt was Caleb's weight pushing him back into the trunk of the car, like an unwanted burden. Andrew tried to stand up, leaning on his trembling hands, but his legs barely supported him. The pain in his ribs, probably fractured by Caleb's violent kicks, made him wince with every breath. He knew he had to get out of there, but how? There was nothing around him to indicate a direction, a path, or anything that could lead him back to civilization. The survival instinct began to take hold of him. Andrew, still sad, struggled to take a step forward. He tried not to think about the pain that ached in his body. Each step seemed very difficult, but he knew that if he stood still, he wouldn't be able to live. His thoughts were confused, but one thing was certain. He had to get out of that forest before it was too late. As he walked, the forest seemed to close in around him. The trees were very tall and old. They formed a thick roof that prevented all the sunlight from entering. The feeling of being alone was very strong. The sound of his footsteps repeated in his mind. It mixed with the sound of distant animals. He felt like someone who could be attacked. He was weak and exposed to anything that lurked in the darkness. But fear didn't stop him. Andrew knew he had to keep going. But the time in the forest passed without forgiveness. Every day was another struggle against hunger, thirst, and tiredness. He walked without knowing where to go. His mouth was dry. His lips were dehydrated, and his body was starting to feel weak. His muscles ached every time he moved. The pain in his ribs made him stop several times to get some air. It was an aimless walk that lasted 4 days. 4 days in which Andrew battled against the despair that made him sadder and sadder. His thirst became too strong. Sometimes he couldn't see straight. The heat of the day made him confused. He began to wonder if he would ever make it through the ordeal. He wondered if he would ever return to San Diego, to his daughter Charlotte, and to the life that now seemed so far away and impossible. It was on the last day, when he was very tired, that Andrew saw something he hadn't expected. Deep in the trees, he saw a shape moving slowly. At first, he thought it was just another illusion in his tired head, but as he slowly got closer, He saw that it was for real. An old man, dressed in ordinary hunting clothes and with a gun slung over his shoulder, was walking quietly through the forest, as if this place were his home. Andrew was very desperate and couldn't speak. He tried to raise his arm to wave, but almost didn't succeed. The hunter, a man in his 60s with gray hair and a wise look, saw him right away and ran over to him. When the man got close, he saw how bad Andrew looked. Dirty, bruised, and almost fainting. "My God, what's happened to you?" asked the man, his voice strong but concerned. Andrew tried to say something, but his dry throat only managed to make a low sound. He only showed himself. He was trying very hard to ask for help. The hunter's name was Dylan, and he had no doubt. With quick, precise movements, he offered Andrew a canteen of water and helped him to sit down on the ground. While Andrew drank the water as if it were the most precious thing in the world, Dylan watched him with attentive eyes. He knew that this man had been through something terrible, but at that moment, all that mattered was getting him out of there into a safe place. "Come on, son, I'll help you. You're safe now," said Dylan, with a confidence that offered a different kind of comfort. "Hold on tight, kid," said Dylan in a low but encouraging voice. "My house isn't far. There you can rest and feel good again." The journey to the hunter's house never seemed to end for Andrew. He tried to stay awake. As they walked through the forest, Dylan tried to help the wounded man. He guided him calmly so that the weight would be lighter. The sounds of nature seemed far away and silent, as if the place where Andrew was stood still. The icy forest air hit his bruised skin, making him feel cold. But the warmth of Dylan, who was by his side, made him feel safe. This was something he hadn't felt for several days. Dylan looked at him sideways, without asking too many questions. He knew that this wasn't the time. The priority was to save the life of the man who had clearly suffered unusual brutality. Dylan's gaze, although strong, held a hint of sadness. He seemed to see in Andrew's injuries the bad things the world can do. After what seemed like a very long walk, they reached a small open area where Dylan's simple wooden hut stood. The house was simple, but very cozy. It was surrounded by old trees. The smell of wet earth mixed with the smoke coming from the chimney. Dylan used one hand to open the door. He held Andrew with his other hand. "Come in. You're safe now," said the hunter, leading Andrew into the hut. The house was warm. The light came from the fireplace burning in the corner of the room. The place smelled of burnt wood, old leather, and dried herbs that hung from the ceiling beams. Dylan led Andrew to an old armchair near the fireplace. Andrew let himself fall into the armchair, feeling a great sense of relief at being in a safe place, away from the fear of the forest. "I'll get you some water and something to eat. Get some sleep," said Dylan, briefly leaving for the kitchen. Andrew looked around. His vision was still fuzzy from tiredness, but little by little, his head began to clear up. He tried to make sense of the last few days, but it was difficult to think clearly. The pain in his body wouldn't stop. It was a reminder of what had happened to her because of Caleb and his companions. Every beat of her heart seemed to cause a new ache in her ribs and arms, but the warmth of the fireplace and the tranquility of the place provided a comfort he hadn't felt since he was taken on that difficult journey. Dylan arrived again, holding a mug of clean water and a piece of bread. He handed the cup to Andrew. Andrew took the glass with trembling hands. He drank the water quickly, as if he was afraid it would run out. Feeling the water in his dry throat brought quick relief. However, the feeling of being safe was beginning to creep in. Andrew felt weak. For the first time in a long time, he was almost crying. Dylan sat down in front of him. His eyes were full of curiosity and affection. "You don't have to talk now if you don't want to," said the old hunter, as he cut a piece of bread and offered it to Andrew. "But I understand you've been through some very difficult times. How did you get here?" Andrew moved his head slowly. He was trying to find the right words. The weight of what he had been through seemed too heavy at the moment. The thought of putting it all into words was almost impossible to bear, but something in Dylan's calm gaze gave him strength. He understood that this man wasn't there to criticize, but to support. Andrew began, his voice weak and uncertain. "I took a beating by the security guards at my own hotel. They left me alone in the forest. They thought I wouldn't be able to get out." Dylan made a serious expression. His eyes hardened when he heard about such cruelty. "Is the hotel yours?" he asked, astonished. Andrew agreed with difficulty and took another drink of water. He talked about what happened. He said that he was attacked for no reason and suffered a lot of violence. He also said that Caleb, who is the head of security, was the one who had him beaten up and left in the forest. Dylan listened without speaking. He looked more worried and sad at every moment. "Damn them," said Dylan, fixing the fire in the fireplace with a piece of wood. "There are a lot of bad people in this world. You were lucky enough to find me. If I found you, I'd tell you." Andrew accepted without saying anything. "I couldn't find the words to show how relieved I was to be alive. I was saved when everything seemed hopeless." In the days that followed, Dylan looked after Andrew with great love. He has seen a lot of pain and suffering before. He brought food, drink, and medicines made from forest plants. Over time, Andrew began to improve. Nights in the hut were calm and quiet, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. However, his mind was still thinking about the bad memories of what had happened. Dylan was a patient and wise person. He never pressured Andrew, but was always close to him. Dylan offered his support in a silent way. In the 3 days he spent at the hunter's house, Andrew's health improved. He also began to find the courage to get back to his life, so he wanted to face his enemies and seek the justice he needed. On the 3rd day, he was in the cabin. When his body was better and he could move more easily, Andrew sat with Dylan by the fire. The warmth made them comfortable, and the sound of the fire was good to hear. "I think it's time for me to go," said Andrew, his voice low but firm. Dylan gave him a quick glance but wasn't surprised. He was sure that this moment was going to happen. "Are you sure?" asked the old hunter quietly. "You're still recovering. You can stay here for a few more days if you need to." Andrew shook his head. A small smile of thanks appeared on his face. "Thank you, Dylan. I really do. If you hadn't been here, I wouldn't be alive right now. I need to go back. I need to sort things out with the people who did this to me. With them, I'm not thinking about revenge. I'm talking about justice." Dylan agreed slowly. There was a glint of understanding in his eyes. "Then let it happen. But don't forget, friend, that true justice doesn't come from hatred in the heart. You've already lived through some very difficult times. Now, you need to seek peace of mind, both for yourself and for those you love." When Andrew arrived in San Diego, a city full of life and movement, he noticed that the streets and buildings were familiar. But everything seemed different. First, he went after his work friends. He met them in a large, cold room in one of the main offices. Every word spoken seemed to resonate in the heavy silence. Andrew knew they weren't involved in what had happened, but he needed them to trust him to do what came next. The partners were sitting at the table and looked worried. They listened carefully as Andrew explained in great detail everything that had happened. He talked about the violent action, the act of kidnapping, and the abandonment in the woods. His eyes shone with anger that he controlled. His voice was firm and showed that he would accept nothing less than justice. "I won't let this go to waste," he said, looking at each partner. His experience could be seen in his words. "They need to pay for what they've done. It's not just about me." Letting a group of men misuse their power is accepting that they do what they want. It shows that they can act out their anger and not be punished. This is very bad, because these actions hurt people and create fear. When no one stops these men, they continue to do harm. The partners agreed. They understood that the problem was serious, so they decided to help Andrew seek justice. But Andrew didn't just need them to agree. He needed evidence, and he knew very well where he could find it. Andrew went to find the man who was in charge of the hotel's security cameras. His name was Ryan. Ryan was a faithful and reliable worker. Andrew knew he could count on him. Ryan had worked at the hotel for many years. He was always very careful in what he did. When Andrew met Ryan, he already knew about what had happened. However, Ryan's face showed surprise and strong loyalty. "Andrew," Ryan said seriously when he saw Andrew, "I'm really sorry about what happened. I heard about the rumors, but I didn't know the situation was so serious. Do you need something from me?" Andrew agreed, looking into Ryan's eyes. "I need the security footage from the day they hurt me," said Andrew, his voice low but full of urgency. "Those recordings are the only proof I have to hold Caleb and the security guards accountable for what they did." Ryan had no doubts. He knew that, even under pressure, the truth had to come out. And, as Andrew would soon learn, Caleb and the other security guards tried to scare Ryan. They knew that the cameras had filmed everything. They tried to get the person responsible for the recordings to erase the evidence. But Ryan, an honest and faithful man, wouldn't give in. "They got close to me," said Ryan, looking nervous. "They tried to make me delete the photos and threatened me, but I would never do that, Andrew. I knew you would need this evidence." Andrew felt a sense of relief and gratitude. Ryan hadn't given in to the pressure. Because of this, he had what he needed to continue with the case. With the recordings in his possession, Andrew knew that he had done a very important thing to ensure that the people who had done wrong were punished. The photos, which were clear and certain, showed everything. They recorded the right moment when Caleb and his team walked up to Andrew in the lobby. They showed the violence of the assault and how they cruelly pulled him out of the hotel. The attackers couldn't deny what had happened. That visual evidence would be their best recourse in court. With the videos safely stored, Andrew and his lawyers organized the court case. The case was dealt with right away. Caleb and the other security guards received formal charges of assault, kidnapping, and attempting to kill someone. The process was not just a matter of justice for the person involved. It was also an important moment to show that no one, no matter their position, can treat another person so cruelly without being punished. In the days before the trial, Andrew remained firm and focused. Her body was not yet fully recovered, but the desire to see the men who had hurt her pay for what they had done gave her the energy she needed to move forward. The support of her family and friends, especially her daughter Charlotte, was very important during this time. Whenever Andrew looked at her, he knew he was doing the right thing. He was thinking not only of himself, but also of her. He wanted her to have the chance to grow up in a world where justice mattered. The day of the trial really arrived. The judge entered the room. The noise of his entrance was heard throughout the courtroom. Everyone stood up. Andrew felt something bother his throat for a moment, but he took a deep breath and remained calm. The hearing began. Caleb's lawyers did everything they could to lessen the charges against him. They said that Caleb and the other security guards were just doing their job. They believed that Andrew was a threat to the hotel. They tried to paint Andrew as someone who had provoked the confrontation, implying that he had reacted disproportionately, bringing up his boxing history as a way of justifying the violence he had suffered. But their words rang hollow in the face of clear evidence. When the security recordings were shown in the room, the atmosphere changed dramatically. All eyes turned to the screen, where the scenes of the brutal assault were shown without cuts. The room was completely silent as the images revealed the truth. Andrew being surrounded, insulted, beaten, dragged out of the hotel, and then placed in the trunk of a car, as if he were a disposable object. The sound of punches and screams echoed in the room, and for the first time, Caleb looked uncomfortable. The blood dripping from Caleb's nose after Andrew's initial punch was a stark reminder that Andrew, even under attack, had fought back. But contrary to what the defense lawyers wanted to paint, there was no provocation on Andrew's part. He was unfairly assaulted several times. These assaults happened because of the prejudice and hatred that the security guards felt. When the recordings ended, the judge, with a straight face, looked directly at Caleb and his friends. The evidence was clear. There was no excuse that could explain so much evil. Andrew had suffered very strong violence, and the photos clearly showed it. Any defense idea that tried to explain away or diminish what had happened had already been completely overturned. Andrew's lawyers, with new confidence, went on to present their case. They called key witnesses, such as Ryan, who looks after the security cameras. He took to the witness stand and told in detail how Caleb and the other security guards tried to scare him into destroying the evidence. Ryan was clear that, even with the threats, he never thought of giving up. He knew that the truth had to win. "They came to me," Ryan said, his voice firm but calm. "They tried to scare me. They threatened me, but I knew that these photos were the only way to ensure that Andrew got justice, and that's what I did. I kept all the recordings as they were." Ryan's words were received with respect. He was the paragon of honesty in that courtroom. His steadfast loyalty to Andrew was very important to the case. Now the attitudes of the security guards were not only a cowardly attack, but also a thought-out attempt to hide the truth. After several days of reports, evidence, and intense conversations between those involved, it was time for the decision. The silence in the courtroom was very strong. Everyone there knew that the judge's choice would not only change Andrew's life, it would also send a message to society. At issue was how the system would deal with racial violence and the misuse of power. The judge, with a serious and thoughtful face, read out his decision. Caleb and the other security guards were found guilty of assaulting, kidnapping, and trying to kill someone. They all received a 7-year prison sentence. In addition, they must pay $60,000 in compensation to Andrew. The sentence gave Andrew great relief, but it also showed that it wasn't the end. Caleb, despite being in prison, still maintained risky contacts. He was a sad man. He had connections that could endanger not only Andrew, but also his family. When the decision was announced, Andrew took a deep breath. He felt relief at having won a fight, but he knew that the effects of that decision would still affect his life. Caleb left the courtroom with his hands clasped. He looked at Andrew with hatred in his eyes. The way he looked at her showed that it wasn't over yet. Andrew understood that Caleb was dangerous, but at that moment, he also realized that he had achieved something much more important. The victory in court gave Andrew a sense of relief. However, the look Caleb gave him that day, when he was led away in handcuffs, stayed in his mind. Caleb was a man who never learned to face defeat. "I grew up in a place with a lot of violence. I learned from an early age to get what I wanted by using force and threats. In prison, these qualities became even stronger. There he was surrounded by thugs and bad groups. He managed to find friends ready to help him think about his revenge. Caleb didn't just want to take physical revenge. He wanted to put an end to everything Andrew had done. He wanted to see the pride and success of the man who had beaten him come to nothing. As time went by, Caleb became close to people from a criminal group that dominated a part of the drug trafficking and illegal activities in San Diego. These men, who had power both inside and outside the prison, saw Caleb as an important ally. He had data and knew how the hotel worked. What's more, he had a very strong desire to put an end to Andrew. It was at this point that the plan began to take shape. Caleb, with the help of his friends, planned a very strong attack. He understood that Andrew liked the hotel. He knew that the place was not just a business, but part of Andrew's history and victories. For Caleb, the goal wasn't just to hurt Andrew physically. He wanted to reach the center of his power and put an end to what showed his success. He wanted Andrew to wake up one day and see everything he had done in pieces. The people in the group agreed to help. In exchange for the help Caleb had promised them in and out of prison, they would put their plan into action. It would be a silent attack, designed to take place at night, when the hotel was empty of people, but the destruction would be complete. Bombs would be placed in the building. They would hit the main parts of the building. There would be nothing left but debris and smoke. The days before the attack were difficult for Andrew. He didn't know what was going to happen. He was trying to get his life back on track, focusing on recovering emotionally and physically. Charlotte, his daughter, remained his main motivation. And every time he saw her, he knew he was fighting for something greater than revenge. He was fighting for his dignity and the safety of his family. But the attack came. It was a quiet night, and Andrew was at home, relaxing with his daughter, when the phone rang. The noise was loud and interrupted the silence of the night. Andrew's heart beat faster on the spot. He picked up the phone and felt something strange. He had the feeling that something very bad had happened. The hurried voice of one of the hotel managers on the other end of the line hit him like a blow. "Andrew, the hotel exploded." The manager's voice was tired and very frightened. They've planted explosives. Everything's on fire. There's nothing left." Andrew's world stood still for a second. His mind took a while to process the words. But when the full impact of the news hit him, he felt as if the ground was collapsing beneath his feet. The hotel, the place for which he had fought so hard, which showcased his victories, was in ruins. He thought of the flames burning every floor and every room that he had seen grow and develop. The emptiness and pain of losing someone hit him hard. Along with it came anger. Andrew realized in that instant that this was no ordinary accident. He knew enough about Caleb to understand that this was the kind of revenge he would take. It was a personal, emotionless revenge that destroyed everything. Now Andrew wasn't just facing a physical attack. He was also dealing with a hurt to everything he had created. When Andrew arrived at the hotel, he saw a scene of destruction. The firefighters were still trying to put out the last of the blazes. The building looked totally different. Where once there had been wealth and victory, now there were only ashes, ruins, and smoke. The smell of smoke was in the air. It mixed with the sound of sirens and the orders shouted by the firemen and police. Andrew stood there, looking at what was left of his kingdom. The memories of many years of work, of sleepless nights, of achievements and challenges overcome, now became dust in front of him. But once again, he realized that he couldn't be totally sad. He had fallen before and somehow always found the strength to get up again. But now, with the destruction of the hotel, his battle was getting bigger. The investigation soon showed that Andrew already knew. The attack was planned and executed by members of the criminal faction with which Caleb had links. Even so, the blow was devastating. The hotel was ruined, and the financial impact was immense. Andrew, who had struggled to remain stable after the court case, now faced a new crisis, even more personal. His dream was ended because of a vendetta. After the hotel was destroyed, Andrew thought he had seen the worst of Caleb's evil, but fate, along with his enemy's strong hatred, was about to show him that the suffering he had gone through so far was only the beginning. On a normal morning, when the San Diego sky was blue and cloudless, Andrew's life was once again drastically changed. That morning, Charlotte had to go to school just like any other 5-year-old. Andrew, even with his chores, always looked closely at his daughter. She meant a lot to him. She was the reason he kept fighting every day. That morning, however, something changed. Andrew's phone rang several times, as if warning him that something bad was about to happen. On the other end of the line, he heard a voice he hadn't expected to hear there. The school principal. "Mr. Walker," she said, with concern and confusion in her voice. "Charlotte didn't show up at school today. We're worried because she's never been absent before. Was there a problem?" Andrew's heart stopped for a moment. The blood seemed to stop circulating in his body. Charlotte didn't arrive at school? That couldn't have happened. He'd left her at the bus stop himself. Andrew's head began to spin. He tried to find an explanation that made sense. Maybe she didn't take the bus? There might have been a mistake, but inside, he knew that something very bad was happening. Andrew tried to stay calm. He hung up the phone and immediately started calling the school bus driver, friends and acquaintances. He wanted to speak to anyone who might have seen Charlotte, but the answers were always the same. No one had seen her. The lack of answers began to cause despair. Fear gripped his heart like a tightening noose. Charlotte had not been found. It was at that moment that Andrew's phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered straight away. He was breathing rapidly because of his anxiety. "Daddy!" Charlotte's weak, frightened voice came from the other end of the line, and Andrew's heart almost stopped again. He recognized her instantly, but before he could speak, a strong, frightening voice came over the line. "If you say a single word, you'll never hear her voice again," said the kidnapper in a cold, thoughtful voice. Andrew stopped. Every muscle in his body tensed, as if he was about to burst with nerves. But he followed orders. His daughter's life was at stake. The kidnapper paused. The silence between words filled only by Andrew's irregular breathing. "We know what you did to Caleb," the voice continued. "You put him in prison. You ruined his life. But he has friends, and we're going to make sure you pay for it. We want $1 million, and we want it fast. If you want to see your daughter alive again, you'll follow our instructions exactly." Those words really hurt Andrew. The air became thicker and he found it difficult to breathe. His daughter, his dear Charlotte, was with very dangerous people who commit crimes. The cause of all this was Caleb's desire for revenge. Andrew knew he had no other option. He would do what was necessary. He would accept the consequences. He was ready to give anything in the world to protect his daughter. "I'll get the money," Andrew said, his voice weak and low, barely coming out. "But if they do anything to her—" "Don't worry, Walker," said the kidnapper, with a coldness that frightened Andrew. "We just need the money. Give us the money and it will be returned to you. If you try to trick us, you'll find her body in parts." The connection was lost. Andrew stood there. He still held the phone in his hand. His head was full of confusion. He had just been through one of the scariest moments of his life. His body was stiff and his heart was beating fast. Charlotte, his little girl, was in danger and he needed to do something fast. Andrew started to get the money together. He spoke to his friends at work and to the banks. He collected every dollar he needed to pay off the kidnappers. The speed with which everything was happening confused him, but he knew he shouldn't stop. The clock was ticking. Every minute lost could make the difference between his daughter's life and death. Over the next few days, as people prepared to hand over the money, Andrew could hardly think of anything but Charlotte. He hardly slept. He spent his nights awake, pacing back and forth in his house without people. Being without his daughter was very difficult. The silence in the house reminded him of how weak he felt because of it. Charlotte's rescue began with the kidnapper's clear demand: $1 million. The request seemed absurd, almost unreal. Andrew had just lost his hotel in an explosion caused by Caleb's revenge, and his finances were seriously compromised. However, no amount was big enough to stop him from saving his daughter. He knew he had to get the money, and quickly. At that moment, Andrew turned to the few allies he had left. He contacted his partners, influential friends, and even former investors. Each call was a mixture of desperation and urgency. The gravity of the situation made him swallow his pride and ask for help, something he rarely did. He no longer cared what anyone might think or say about him. What mattered most was getting the money together in time. With every passing second, it seemed like a long time to Charlotte. The sound of the clock seemed to warn her that she was in danger. Her contacts responded quickly. They understood how serious Andrew was. They knew what he had been through. Above all, they knew how much love he felt for his daughter. Within a few days, people had collected the money. The very large sum, kept in a strong suitcase, symbolized Andrew's hope. He understood that that amount of money didn't mean anywhere near what Charlotte meant to him, but that $1 million was the only thing that could bring his daughter back into his arms. The kidnapper's orders were direct and easy to understand. The place where the handover was to take place was an empty lot. It was a forgotten place near San Diego. The scenery was sad and deserted. It showed the desperation that Andrew was feeling. The rules were easy. He had to go unaccompanied, not call the police, and not make any jokes. The danger was obvious. Andrew understood that any mistake, any attempt to deceive the kidnappers, could put Charlotte's life in danger, and he wouldn't have the courage to do that. On the right day, Andrew drove to the agreed place. The weather seemed to make the tension worse. The sky was gray and heavy. A light rain soaked the tarmac and left a cold, damp sheen. He held his briefcase tightly. His fingers were white. His heart was beating fast. The anxiety was too great, but he needed to stay calm. His mind, which is usually quick and logical, was now filled with a single concern: getting Charlotte back home. When I arrived at the empty lot, the place looked abandoned. It was a scene of neglect. Many old houses stood around it. They seemed to have no one left. Andrew got out of the car holding his briefcase. He looked around. The silence was very strong. He was totally alone. Or at least it seemed that way. With every step he took, the noise echoed on the wet ground. The sound of his shoes seemed to be the only evidence of life in the place. He waited. The minutes passed slowly. Each one seemed to last a long time. The icy wind hit his face. But Andrew hardly noticed it. You were only thinking about the one thing that was important: Charlotte. When she saw the car coming, she felt a mixture of relief and fear. The car had no license plates. It was black and plain. The vehicle moved slowly until it stopped a few meters from where she was standing. The tension was very strong. Two people wearing hoods got out of the car. They walked towards him slowly without hurrying. This made Andrew even more desperate inside. His eyes wouldn't leave the car door. He waited and asked to see Charlotte get out, to know that she was safe. But before anything could happen, one of the men put his hand forward. "The money is the most important thing," he said, his voice strong and commanding. Andrew, without saying a word, put the suitcase on the floor, as they had asked. His heart was beating very fast. He was very anxious. He saw the man coming and picked up the suitcase. Everything seemed to happen slowly. He opened the suitcase and looked inside. Then he signaled to the man who was still near the car. Then the car door opened. Charlotte stepped out. She was shaking and her eyes were full of fear. Andrew struggled to hold back the emotion that rose in his throat. She looked very small and very fragile. But most importantly, she was alive. His body moved quickly towards her. When she saw him, Charlotte ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy!" she called out, her voice broken by crying. Andrew lifted her up and hugged her tightly. He felt Charlotte's small, trembling body pressed against his. For an instant, everything around them disappeared. The fear, dread, and tension vanished when he picked her up again. She was present. She felt calm. He held her in his arms and kissed her head. He felt tears streaming down his face as he spoke words of comfort. "It's all right now," he said, his voice low, trying to control his feelings. "Dad is here. You're safe." The kidnappers, with the money they got, didn't say anything. They just got into the car and drove off as quickly as they had arrived. Andrew no longer cared about them. What mattered most was Charlotte, and she was alive. The men got what they wanted. But Andrew won the only fight that really mattered: protecting his daughter. After what seemed like a long time hugging Charlotte, Andrew was finally able to breathe. But that relief, however real, was short-lived. He understood that there was something much darker behind all this. The kidnappers didn't just want money. He later learned that the money would be used to get Caleb out of prison. Caleb, full of the desire for revenge, was going back to the streets. At that moment, as Andrew held Charlotte tightly, he realized that the fight against Caleb wasn't over yet. The rescue of his daughter was just another victory in a fight that was far from over. Caleb wouldn't be satisfied with just the destruction of the hotel or the kidnapping. He wanted to end everything that Andrew was. Andrew tried to get back into a routine, but fear and anxiety were always with him. He wouldn't talk about Caleb with Charlotte. He wanted to protect Charlotte from the sad situation that was happening around them. He knew he couldn't stay like this for long. You felt that having a meeting with Caleb was something that was going to happen. That meeting would be very important. After the trial, Caleb felt an increasing hatred for Andrew. Now he was freer and more dangerous than before. He wanted revenge. It wasn't a question of if it would happen, but of when. And that day came faster than Andrew thought. It was a normal afternoon in San Diego. Andrew took Charlotte to see a basketball game in the city gym. He was trying to give her a sense of normality. He wanted her to have a moment of respite from the tension that was present in their lives. The gymnasium was full of families and children. The sound of laughter and bouncing balls spread through the place. It made the atmosphere seem pleasant. For a moment, Andrew could almost forget his worries. He was seeing his daughter smile, which had become rare in recent days. When Andrew turned to get something to drink, he felt a presence that made his stomach lurch. When I looked up, I saw him. Caleb was standing in the corner of the gym. He was looking at him with a smile that seemed cruel and threatening. The man looked calm, almost unconcerned. He just seemed to be there to watch the game, but Andrew was sure that look was no accident. Caleb followed the person. He was watching, and above all, he was waiting for the right time to do something. Andrew's body stiffened quickly. He felt his survival instincts light up. The world around him seemed to slow down. The line of people, the noises, and the hustle and bustle seemed to disappear as he looked at Caleb. Andrew could sense the risk around him. Caleb's smile showed that he was still determined to end Andrew's life. Andrew took a quick look at Charlotte. She was sitting there doing nothing, unaware of the danger that was coming. He didn't want to make her afraid. but he knew he had to get her away from there quickly. Andrew went straight to his daughter. He walked quickly and tried to speak calmly.
"Charlotte, we're going out,"
he said, holding her hand tightly.
"But the game isn't over yet, Dad," she said, not knowing why he was in such a hurry.
"I understand, but we need to leave now. I'll take you somewhere more fun," he said, trying to smile, but his smile showed that he was very scared inside. As he led Charlotte out of the gym, Andrew noticed that Caleb was staring at him intensely. He knew Caleb wasn't going to do anything there, in the middle of so many people, but the encounter, the icy stare and the mischievous smile were a promise. Caleb was sending a direct message. "I'm back, and I'm going to beat you." Andrew knew Caleb was looking for him, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. After leaving Charlotte in a safe place, at the house of a friend he trusted, Andrew knew he had to deal with the problem directly. Running away or hiding were not choices. He had learned over the years that the only way to confront men like Caleb was to look at them directly. Andrew knew that the next meeting was going to take place in an enclosed space. Caleb was thinking of something bigger and more dangerous. Andrew didn't want to wait around to find out what was going to happen. He decided to do something before Caleb had the chance. Andrew started planning a meeting with Caleb. He got help from some friends who worked in the police and from private security that he hired after the kidnapping. He knew Caleb and knew that he was agitated and rough, but he also knew that Caleb liked to have the upper hand in situations. So if Andrew gave him the opportunity for a challenge, Caleb would take it. Andrew sent a message via someone else, so the message reached Caleb. The message was clear: a date on the basketball court, at night, when there was no one around. Caleb had always wanted to sort things out between the two of them without anyone getting in the way. He wanted Caleb to think that now he would have the chance to get rid of him. Andrew wasn't alone. He had set a trap. The police and security guards were well in place, ready to act at the right time. On the agreed night, Andrew arrived at the gym, unaccompanied, as he had agreed. The place was dark and quiet. This was very different from the excitement that always took place there during matches. Every noise seemed louder. The sound of his footsteps hit the empty walls. He was nervous, but ready. His mind, trained by many years of dealing with difficulties, was focused on what he had to do. A while later, Caleb arrived. The way he sat, the smile that seemed vain, and the eyes full of anger, showed that he thought he was certain to win. For Caleb, this meeting was the opportunity to finally beat Andrew and finish him off once and for all. "So you chose to be brave and face me alone?" Caleb asked, approaching slowly with his hands in his pockets, as if it were just a game to him. Andrew looked at him, showing no fear. He knew that this was the important moment.
"It's not about courage, Caleb. It's about necessity. Andrew said that you've already done a lot of harm to your family. He said it will end today." His voice was firm, but calm.
Caleb laughed coldly. The sound of it spread through the empty gym.
"It will end for sure, Walker, but not in the way you imagine,"
he replied, as he pulled a gun out of his jacket. Andrew's heart beat faster, but he remained calm. He knew that Caleb was about to make a big mistake. Before Caleb could move, the policemen and security guards who had been hiding appeared. They surrounded Caleb on all sides. Caleb stood still, surprised. His smile suddenly disappeared. "It's over, Caleb. You're under arrest," said one of the policemen, holding up his gun. Caleb looked like he wanted to fight for a moment, but the truth soon came to him. He had no way out. There was no escape. Anger appeared on his face as he was arrested. He looked at Andrew with great hatred. "It's not over yet, Walker. I'm going to get you somehow," shouted Caleb as they took him away. Andrew knew that what Caleb said was a threat. Even so, he felt as if a weight had come off his shoulders. Caleb was in prison again. Now there was plenty of evidence to show that he would be there for a long time. The fear he had caused in the lives of Andrew and his family was finally coming to an end. The day of Caleb's retrial soon arrived. The judge entered the room. Then the proceedings began. The prosecutors presented the evidence correctly. The recordings, the messages that were taken, the confessions of Caleb's friends, all of it clearly showed that he was guilty. Caleb had used his group of criminals to attack Andrew in a planned and violent way. He hadn't just destroyed a hotel or taken a child. He had tried to ruin Andrew's life in various ways, with an almost sick obsession. When the time came for Andrew to speak, he climbed into the witness box as calmly as he had during his walk. He took a good look at Caleb as he spoke. He knew that this was the important moment. "From the beginning, Caleb did everything he could to break me," said Andrew, his voice strong but not angry. "He didn't just want to hurt me on the outside. He wanted to take everything I had, my image, my family, my peace of mind. But I didn't let him achieve that. Today, I'm here because I believe that justice will win. Caleb used fear and force to rule over the people around him. Now, he can no longer get away with what he did." Andrew's words were heard throughout the room. The courtroom was quiet. Everyone was looking at him. Caleb, who was sitting next to his lawyers, showed no feelings. Andrew knew inside him that his chances of escape were rapidly diminishing. After Andrew gave his testimony, other people also spoke and showed evidence. Thus, Caleb's defense was challenged and torn apart little by little. The lawyers tried to say that Caleb was influenced by people who commit crimes. They claimed that he couldn't control what his friends did. But the evidence was very clear. Caleb not only led his group of criminals, he was also the person who planned everything. When the judge came to the courtroom to give the result of the case, everyone was full of anticipation. Andrew knew that this moment would change Caleb's future and finally bring about the end he had wanted. The judge, with a firm voice full of power, began to read out the decision. Caleb, you have been found guilty of several crimes. These crimes are conspiracy, kidnapping, attempting to kill someone, and extortion. What you do shows that you want to end the life of Andrew Walker and other people close to him, using violent and outlaw ways. With the evidence shown, this court is not sure about your guilt. The room was quiet as the judge continued speaking. So, you will be imprisoned for 20 years. For the first 20 years, you will have no chance of getting out of prison. Your links to crime groups and your way of continuing to do wrong things even in prison show that you are still a danger to society. This court guarantees that you won't be able to cause any more problems for anyone. Andrew felt relieved. 20 years. It was a phrase that for Caleb meant the end of his life as he knew it. He wouldn't be getting out of prison anytime soon. When he did, he would be an old and forgotten man. The cycle of fear and revenge that Caleb had started was finally coming to an end. Caleb stood still when he heard the sentence. The look he had had throughout the trial was gone. In its place was a lifeless expression. He realized that his time of causing fear had come to an end. He no longer had any friends who could control him. There were no more ways to escape justice. He was lost. And this time, for good. As Caleb left the courtroom with the help of guards, Andrew sat for a few minutes, thinking about what had happened. He understood that the battle had been difficult and tiring, but at that moment, he felt that he had achieved what he so desperately wanted: justice. It wasn't just about wanting revenge. It was about taking care of his daughter. It was about ensuring that his family could live peacefully. They wanted to live without the fear that Caleb had brought into their lives.